This weekend at UFC 296, we are seeing that old matchup once again. It's like a brand new black t-shirt from Target. It seems new, but it's the exact same thing we've seen you wear for years now. It's wrestling versus striking once again. Now, usually we'd all be saying wrestling wins. That's all. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in tomorrow's video. But I just want us to take a break for a moment and have a good look around the UFC landscape. Most of the current UFC champions are strikers. It's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Something has slowly changed. The wrestling versus striking dynamic, the meta in MMA has changed really quickly. Now, I've been saying relentlessly since I started this channel that offensive jiu-jitsu is, in modern MMA, less than useless, yeah? The only thing it's good for is creating scrambles and finishing off an already done opponent. Okay, so maybe not less than useless. It has some use, but it's not very good. Yeah, the last time we saw a Gracie in the cage was quite frankly embarrassing. Now, why is that? It's because every competent MMA athlete, sportsman, guy who's now in the UFC or even getting into the Contender Series or anyone ranked at PFL or at Cage Warriors, so on, a decent MMA athlete. They all know enough about jiu-jitsu to survive, right? Like, we all know that if you ever see a T-Rex in the wild, don't move. It can't see you if you don't move. We know nothing about the mythical animal of the T-Rex itself, but we know enough to survive against it. And now the same thing could be said for wrestling in MMA in 2023, as it could be said for jiu-jitsu in MMA in 2023. Like, it wasn't too long ago that DC could steamroll anyone, or Khabib was so dominant that people like Dustin Poirier would choose to just wrap up the guard and give away entire rounds rather than fight out of it. And do not get me wrong, we still see fighters all the time with strong wrestling, or fighters that are not competent enough to get out of high level wrestling situations. We literally just saw that this weekend with Yadong versus Gutierrez. But when we start to look at the higher level of MMA, most of the champions are strikers, yeah? Like Volkanovski, striker; Edwards, striker; Pereira, striker; Sean O'Malley, striker; Pantoja, striker. In fact, look how impressive Islam Makhachev has been with his striking. And obviously he is the king champion of wrestling. I'm not going to say that he's not a wrestler. Obviously he's a wrestler. Maybe him and John Jones, they are the king champions of wrestling. But even really John Jones, to me, the heavyweight champion of the world in the UFC, at least at the moment, is Tom Aspinall, not John Jones. And yes, Tom Aspinall, he knows jiu-jitsu and he knows wrestling, but it's really his striking that separates him from the rest of heavyweight. His movement, how clean his boxing look, how fluid he is on the feet. I think what we're seeing here is the overall growth of MMA. Wrestling for so long has been highly touted and put on a pedestal for years. But why is that? Number one, it's because of its pedigree in the US. The US has that collegiate wrestling thing. And when you're in the US talking about, MMA from a US point of view, quite frankly, wrestling gets massively glazed beyond any other skill. To them, it is the be-all and end-all basis of MMA. Whereas when you look at South America, it's jiu-jitsu. When you look at Southeast Asia and my region, it's all, stand-up Muay Thai striking. But it's not just because of the incredible bias that the commentary team like Daniel Cormier have for wrestling and the entire American audience has for wrestling in general. It's the fact that you had that US bias, that USA, also along with the fact that wrestling was so dominant. It maybe earned that bias and it earned that respect. But now things are starting to change, and I do believe a lot of it has to do with how far the game has come, how well the judges understand the rules of MMA, how well the audience is starting to understand the rules, and the fact that the cage exists as well. And the fighters are understanding that in wrestling, in MMA, the cage is your best friend. We've seen excellent collegiate wrestlers have their wrestling completely nullified because there is a cage to post up against to create scrambles. And also then you mix that in with the often useless BJJ, but that also helps create these scrambles. And we start to see that, with Usman versus Leon Edwards, Usman was constantly trying to throw that chain wrestling at Edwards, and Edwards is always able to post and stay up and return to his feet when he needs to. We're seeing the same thing with Alex Pereira. He understands how to get his underhook, stay up, to scramble and get back onto his feet. Go and watch that fight with Jan Blachowicz again. Alex's takedown defense is on point, and I think that is because Glover has been training him so hard in the wrestling. Look at Alexander Volkanovski. He held his own with one of the best wrestlers in the UFC, Islam Makhachev. And as we've watched more and more progression of the game, we've seen wrestlers abandoning their wrestling base. I'll bring up Justin Gaethje. Kamaru Usman was a massive wrestler and turned into a stand-up striker, wanted to go and box with Canelo. And again, Islam Makhachev is showing us how much of a competent striker he is. When you start to mix in high-level MMA that starts to understand wrestling, now with a more educated panel of judges, you really start to see that wrestling, while it is a great base, is starting to fall off as the dominant force in MMA. Now, I'm not saying that judges don't get it wrong all the time. They obviously do, but the judging has slowly gotten better. People are now starting to understand the actual rules. This sport is based on damage-based scoring, and simply getting a takedown and holding someone there does not win you around in male MMA. You have got to actually get a takedown and do some significant damage, not even just tap body, tap head. You've got to start laying some serious ground and pound, some hard elbows, actually going for some fight-ending submissions. You cannot just wet blanket yourself to a victory if during the stand-up exchanges, the striker has landed some really good shots. Now you've got more competent judges, you have a higher level of general knowledge in MMA, and we're starting to see that wrestling is sort of slipping down to the B plan. And, I'm not making this to trash talk the wrestlers, I'm not putting it all the way down as the D plan like jiu-jitsu, but it is slowly slipping away from that absolutely dominant MMA A plan. And we're beginning to see a nice, rangy striker that understands wrestling. That is the new meta of MMA, which is a big deal once again when you ask yourself, at UFC 296, we have a wrestler against a striker. And just saying that sentence, if you're a long-term MMA fan, which UFC 296 seems to be built for, with Wonderboy and Ferguson. This is the card of the legends passing on the baton. You've asked yourself many times, wrestler versus striker, and you think that you have tasted this meal that's been served up to you before. But this striker, Leon Edwards, has won his last 2 in a row against a dominant wrestler. So the question is, who is going to be winning at UFC 296? Is it going to be the striker or the wrestler? A couple of years ago, that answer would have been pretty obvious, but now this weekend, it's going to get very, very interesting. Let me know down in the comments, who do you think has it this weekend? Leon Edwards, Colby Covington, where do you think wrestling stands? Has wrestling fallen off as the dominant force in MMA? Are we now seeing the rise of the rangy striker? I think if you just look at the champions alone, we absolutely are. I'm always keen to hear your comments down there in the comments section. If you're enjoying these videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button down there. Small creators like me always appreciate every single little sub along the journey. And of course, I will see you all in the next video.